because we, and in particular, the first speaker was actually in charge of a national emergency management system for a long time. William Craig Fugate. He is the former FEMA administrator, an emergency management leader, and that was under the President Obama's administration. FEMA, of course, being for those who are not familiar, the US Federal Emergency Management Agency. So a lot of experience in having those kind of responsibilities in setting up these systems and maintaining an effective national emergency management system. So William Craig Fugate is going to speak to the ethics of AI in emergency management. So William, over to you.
All right, well, thank you for having me. I want to put this in the perspective of local crisis or emergency managers. I think we always talk about the big systems, but AI has been changing so much that we've gone from AI being something that we see at institutional scales of building it in the models and predictive and analytics. But now with large language models and other tools being made available, AI is no longer something that local emergency managers are looking for somebody to come up with a solution. They're using it every day. And some of the more powerful tools are things that they've not been able to do without bringing in extra staff or extra contracting, like developing realistic tabletop exercises, being able to take their plans and other documents and cross-reference and look for inconsistencies, building in, as they get new information, their assumptions and test it against that, and also using them as decision support tools. You know, as much as we talk about AI's improvements in forecasting for weather events, local officials still then have to take that information and make decisions. Do they evacuate? Who do they evacuate? How much time do they have? And those are things that I think AI can help speed up. They can help be a force multiplier. But as I found with a lot of local emergency managers in the United States, there's a lot of questions. In some cases, local governments are reluctant to use AI for fears. Other cases, there's this idea that it's going to replace people. My observation, and I think this is true for all of our organizations, we're not getting more staff anytime soon. So how do we use these tools to enhance our teams? And so I came up with this draft of what I call AI ethics, or probably a better term would have been AI guardrails. And again, this is focused on in the United States, but I think it's applicable to anywhere where local governments have that initial response ability to respond in a crisis or a disaster before outside help gets there. So with that, I'm going to go to my screen share and bring up the presentation. And so as I go through this, I really wrote this, and I focused on operations. You know, we talk about mitigation and resilience and a lot of things, and I was really looking at this from a standpoint of a decision-making support tool. And so as I go through this, let's go through. And this was just the one page. If there was nothing else anybody paid attention to when I presented this, because emergency managers, I don't know about other folks, but they have short attention spans. So sometimes I just got to get it out there. It's a tool. Emergency managers decide, and accountability stays human. We've heard this in previous presentations. But again, I was really trying to speak to local emergency managers. I served this one. I did that before I moved to the state and to FEMA. So my background actually starts out at the local level. But one of the things I said is, look, we don't want to build autopilot decisions. No black boxes, bias and diversity checks, which has been brought up previously. Operations that work if AI fails, because we keep creating new dependencies with technologies. And I keep reminding emergency managers, our experience, at least in the US, after wildfires and hurricanes and earthquakes, we oftentimes lose connectivity. The internet goes down. We've seen data centers go down. So your operation still has to work. You cannot build a dependency here that is subject to failure. So technology assists, leadership decides, and accountability stays human. And if that was the entire presentation they paid attention to, that would hopefully give them that. But it's everywhere. I find that a lot of people, when we start talking about it, I says, have you ever noticed that when you're using email, it starts making recommendations for you? Well, that's AI. It's a tool. And, again, as we've said, emergency managers, crisis managers, whatever that local terminology, they make decisions and the humans are accountable. And just some examples, and we're seeing this already where we're having tools that design warning messages. The Weather Service has been using this for years. The key point here is when that message is generated, it always has a human, a real person, reading it and making sure that it's accurate before it gets sent. And we also want to make sure that there is a name attached to these warnings so that if something goes wrong, we know who issued it. We know what, we can go back and look at that. And the answer is, well, the AI did that is not defensible. And so that's the other thing we want local emergency managers to know. AI is never held accountable. You are. No matter what the model said, no matter what it recommended, you're the one that's responsible and you're accountable for that. So it's a tool. Emergency managers make decisions. They're accountable. If it interferes with that, it shouldn't be used. It can draft, analyze, organize, suggest, give opinions. Humans must review, validate, decide, and own the outcomes. And it's really good. And I found that the tools that it puts in the hands of local emergency managers or crisis managers are more powerful than probably this is as much as a revolution as when we introduced the internet, or we started looking at how social media, and all those carry their risk, and we see those problems. But it's a new powerful tool that we're just now starting to get some understanding and ideas of how to use. So we're still, in many cases, still exploratory. But making or announcing operational decisions, issuing warnings or alerts directly, or replacing the leadership team or the humans is prohibited. AI can inform, you still need humans to deciding. And predictive analysis presented a certainty. I've probably my earliest work were with teams that were building predictive models for hazards, such as converting rainfall into areas that would likely be flooded, or turning earthquake initial data into what the damage would look like. And I think there was a confusion that because there was so much data there that people thought that was precision and that would be what happened. And it was like, no, it's predictive. It's not going to be 100%, but at least it helps us shape what is likely to have happened and what the needs will be. But it's not going to be something that's so precise I can say that building flooded and that building didn't. We have to plan for that as it's presented as a predictive analysis, just like a weather forecast is a forecast. It's not a fact. Other things we see people doing is now generating after action reports and other documents using AI. And in fact, many times when you're on these conference calls, AI is generating summaries, but it doesn't become an official record without review. And acting autonomously without human oversight. That is, I think, a concern. As these systems get better and better and people get more comfortable with them, they'll start, I think, relaxing their oversight. And that in itself, I think, is a danger we have to watch for. So you can't outsource accountability. You have to have that designated official. Every AI output needs a human owner. AI output is a staff draft. It still needs to be reviewed, validated, and corrected before use. Final decisions rest with the accountable authorities, not the tools. And this is another one that I think is interesting, is what I call the no black box rules. If you can't explain what it's doing and how it's doing it, you shouldn't be using it. And in the early days of AI, I heard this often, well, we know what it's telling us, we just don't know how it's getting there. I think this is one of the things that leads to bias. If we don't understand how AI is looking at data, what it's doing to come up with its recommendations, we're gonna run into, as somebody pointed out, just being faster doesn't make it better. If a model produced it That's not the acceptable answer. It's the model made a recommendation, we reviewed it, and we checked it against biases and other things that our knowledge tells us. Also, you got data protection. And in the US, this is particularly concerning with private information, classified information, law enforcement intelligence, other things, and again, working with local public safety agencies. What's safe to put in there? And this is an interesting thing where most of the access to the large language models are using cloud-based solutions outside of an organization. But we know the models do better when you train them on your data. So one of the recommendations has been for those types of information which would be close hold or restricted is building the large language models on servers within a jurisdiction that were firewalled off from outside access. So you can still get the benefits of that without exposing data or information that should not be shared. This has been brought up, but as an emergency manager, I will tell you, equity bias is a huge issue in disasters. And I think even within the emergency management communities, I've seen too often that there are underrepresented communities that when a disaster strikes, the plans don't address. And AI is not going to be any better at that. I think this is one of the things we got to continue to emphasize. Emergency managers need to know the communities they serve, not just the areas they're in every day, but the entire community, including those that tend to be underrepresented or more vulnerable. This cannot be automated. We can put a lot of data in there, we can help shape that, but it still requires that understanding of the communities that maybe not are represented in our data, but will still be impacted and will need assistance in disasters. It can hate, this is, the thing about it can help us think faster, but it can't think for us. And operational resilience. If you can't shut it off, it can't be used. Speed does not justify unchecked errors of speed. We plan for failure. We maintain manual fallbacks. We stay operational. Because if you lose the connectivity to these large language models or to these other AI models that are not operating at your location, can you still run the operation? So when the disaster hits, survivors look to you. When something goes wrong, you answer to the community. When the investigation begins, you're personally accountable. You're in charge, you're accountable, you make the calls. AI supports doesn't decide, humans review every output. Designated official owns results. No black boxes explain it or don't use it. Protect sensitive data always. Review for bias and inequality. Plan for failure. If it can't be shut off, it can't be used. Does this improve the outcome? Is a human clearly in charge, and can we operate it without it when it fails at the worst possible time? So we review, we train, and we implement. And this isn't about being anti-AI. It's about helping local emergency managers develop a framework to avoid many of the missteps or concerns that have been raised in previous presenters. And that concludes that.
Thank you, William, for really thought-provoking presentation. It's always nice to walk away from a presentation with something very clear in your mind. So the technology assists, the leadership decide, and the humans are accountable. I'll remember that. I think it's a really nice a nice way to pitch AI in our space. Thanks a lot.